Welcome to the instruction manual. On today's page, we are visiting the next old school master, Confucius. He is known as the father of modern Chinese philosophy and can definitely be called one of the most successful teachers of all time. Did you know that the name Confucius is the Latinized version of the birth name Confucius? Out of respect, we will be using his traditional Chinese name during our presentation. Confucius shares much in common with another old school master, Socrates, who we've already covered on this channel. Both masters acquired students who compiled records of their philosophies, achievements, and teachings. The Analects were written by students of Confucius, while Socrates appears in the writings of his students, Plato, Xenophon, and Aristotle. Each of these masters are also famous for teaching philosophies and social practices that are still used by people today. The teachings of Confucius have impacted the social dynamics of China for over 2,000 years. Knowing this, we believe that borrowing from his philosophy could help you find success in your own classroom. With that in mind, let's look at today's schedule. First, we will go over a brief history lesson on the life of Confucius. Next, you'll be introduced to specific teaching practices used by Confucius, followed by ideas on how you can incorporate his teaching methods into your own self-motivated classroom. But before we turn to the next page, don't forget to leave a like for this video and take the time to please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate your support so much. Alright, now it's time to introduce our favorite 6th grade teacher, Mr. Branch. If Mr. Branch were like Confucius, he would live in an area of ancient China that was constantly at risk of engaging in warfare with its neighbor states. And he would not initially be interested in teaching as a profession. Instead, Mr. Branch would seek out work as a bureaucrat or government clerk. During his career in politics, he would see many things that would create his beliefs on how states are governed and how individuals impact the process of governing. One of the most important of these discoveries was that people tend to form social hierarchies. Social hierarchies appear in even the most mundane places like home and school. Even an average family forms a type of hierarchy, where children perform duties for their parents' sake, and, in Chinese culture, parents would perform duties for the sake of their own parents and ancestors. At school, students fulfilled duties for teachers and teachers for administrators. Mr. Branch would eventually determine that the moral virtue of one person can greatly affect the stability of an entire social structure. If a father left his family, then that would destabilize the other members. Even ancestors were affected by not receiving worship or for being affiliated with a corrupt person. And if one bureaucrat or official in a government gives in to corruption, then that corruption would soon weaken the entire state. In response to his observations, Mr. Branch would resolve to live in pursuit of moral and personal perfection. He was a dutiful son to his parents and an involved father. He would dress to the nines and mindfully attend to rituals of ancestor worship. He would refuse to give in when asked to perform corrupt practices, and he would quickly work to unveil those who did not uphold their responsibilities within the system. You might think Mr. Branch would be praised for his strong character, but you'd be very wrong. Instead, Mr. Branch was expelled from his government post, and his peers made it very difficult for him to continue working for the state. Luckily, all of his efforts did not go unnoticed. Students and other local youth could not help but notice Mr. Branch. Despite being barred from work, Mr. Branch would nevertheless continue to look and act like the perfect gentleman, no matter where he went or whom he worked for. People would eventually approach Mr. Branch and begin to request that he become their formal teacher. Mr. Branch gladly accepted his new students and gave many lessons on how to maintain and practice moral virtue. His lessons would carry on into future social and political policies that are still practiced in China and many other Asian countries to this very day. Now we will let our old school master give you 9 Confucian teaching practices to use in your own classroom. He'll be discussing practices that can be integrated into our self-motivated classroom model that we have covered in other videos on this channel. Click the link in the description if you'd like to see more information about the curriculum. And now, without further ado, take it away, Confucius.
Thank you, Sadie. For now, we will divide my teaching precepts into 2 categories. One category about teaching practices for instructors, and the other will look at building your classroom culture. Practice number 1. Adapt your teaching style to individual students. Teachers can try to devote a portion of class time for one-on-one instruction. This is a great way to hone in on barriers that keep your students from achieving higher levels of mastery. Learn how each student performs as an individual and within a group setting. You will also need to consider accommodations for students with learning disabilities. Practice number 2. Limit formal lectures. Neither myself or my fellow master, Socrates, were known for lectures. Instead, we focused on individual relationships with each student. If you are teaching a post-secondary classroom, you're more likely to implement lectures into your modeling. But consider the drawbacks of using them primarily. Lectures tend to lack direct modeling practices and do not accommodate for varied intelligence types amongst your students. Students have to rely primarily on auditory processing and upon note-taking ability instead of direct application of lesson topics. If you do plan to deliver lectures that take more than 10 minutes, consider using sensorial examples to help convey real-world application. Practice number 3. Expect students to think for themselves. In a self-motivated classroom, students initiate classwork and are taught to recognize their individual level of mastery. Tiered work materials for remedial, standard and advanced grade levels are always present in the classroom. Tutors are made available to help students initiate question and answer sessions, or they can seek help from the instructor when the class schedule allows. Practice number 4. Teach to the need of the student. The tiered work materials address all learning levels in a self-motivated classroom. Remember, you can extend from worksheets to reading practices, small reading or work groups, and use manipulative or didactic materials if you teach elementary or lower secondary grade levels. Materials for all levels of mastery should be available for students at all times. Practice number 5. Learn from others. We've spoken about using classroom tutors, but you can also invite guest speakers to provide direct modeling and fresh material for your students. Speakers do not have to come from outside of the school. You can ask other teachers, administrators like the principal, or the librarian to demonstrate how they use aspects of your subject or unit topic in their work. If you teach math, let guests demonstrate how math is incorporated into their job. Or you can invite them to reading practices, which, by the way, you've cleverly disguised as mini book clubs complete with tea and snacks that create a stress-free learning activity. Don't be afraid to introduce new faces and new content whenever possible.
Would this be a good example of how we can seg into building classroom culture?
Yes, it would be. This book club is the opposite of how most teachers would envision their classroom culture. Most simply strive to create a study-friendly environment where students are asked to maintain a quiet classroom that allows for easy lesson delivery, or more likely for lectures. You know who you are. Discipline issues typically arise when a student disrupts the quiet classroom with excessive movement or by talking at inappropriate times. But a self-motivated classroom promotes motion, progression, and constant dialogue between a teacher and their students. You will find that my students enjoyed a learning atmosphere that was much the same. Creating a Confucian-style culture of learning requires an environment where students wish to learn from each other as well as their teacher. They desire to find inspiration and assistance from class peers who are modeling peak learning behavior and achieving mastery in the class subject. Or if the students are advanced, they seek to help their peers grow into further understanding and mastery. We start with looking at 4 practices to use in your self-motivated classroom. Number 1. Be aware of common errors. This is a philosophy adopted by your students in which they keep consistent tabs on their learning progress. Have students build and track a personal webpage on Google Sites where they can log grades, journal about setbacks in their learning, or on ideas on how to improve grades. Students can also share success stories with their parents. Number 2. Understand motivations to learn and be self-motivating. One individual can greatly affect an entire social system or hierarchy. The same can be said for a classroom. However, a single student's performance is determined by several factors, including pressures at home or personal motivation. While one student may be very ambitious and yearn to make top grades, another may have very little willingness to perform classwork, or they may have concerns outside of grades or school success that affect their performance. Allow students to share personal motivations and determine if they are motivated to achieve standard grade level mastery within your classroom. Learn if excellence is important to them, or are there other matters that are more pressing. Whatever their answer, let them know that their goals and motivations matter to you. Whatever their current view is, don't be afraid to encourage your students to take small, manageable steps towards mastery. Classwork will feel less overwhelming and more attainable when assigned without expectations that reflect our own biases. Number 3 and 4 can be introduced together since they reflect the same basic principle. Number 3 is to identify struggling students who are making an effort. Next is number 4, govern by virtue and control with propriety. Introduce goal planning into your one-on-one teaching sessions, along with directions on how to track personal growth on Google Site pages. Students working at the remedial level are taught to seek help from trained tutors or make time for one-on-one sessions with the instructor. They are also taught to plan small, easily attainable steps towards improvement. This plan is logged on their personal sites with help from either an instructor or a tutor. Now it is time to see our Confucian classroom in action. Student A works with remedial worksheets in science and so far is only receiving failing grades. During one-on-one sessions, Mr. Branch recommends that they work with a student tutor to complete the worksheets. The student tutor is an advanced or grade level student who is trained to use visual aids and will likely use examples that are more relevant to student work life. Mr. Branch identifies errors that student A is making and suggests that he work to correct specific mistakes on tomorrow's worksheet using various approaches like increased visual aids, topical videos or discussions with a guest speaker who may have used alternative means to succeed in the subject. He then has student A log his current grade, as well as the plan of action that includes small, achievable steps onto his personal webpage. As student A shows improved grade outcomes, he can log his increased scores and share his success with his parents as well. If your classroom does not use web access, please feel free to have students use pen and paper journals. Either way, the journaling process allows students to share and track progress with those in a position to assist with making improvements. Mr. Branch would allow his students to take initiative in seeking help from classroom tutors. Student A would learn how to execute their action plan and recognize that their own decisions have led to a better outcome in class, where his own virtue governs the actions that he takes towards success. When they decide to share their success with classmates, then this is a step towards creating a culture where students seek help from each other in an effort to earn individual mastery. Class peers would see the growth of one individual and seek to achieve that same outcome with the simple step of asking help from classmates. We can now see how one person can inspire a class of 20 or so students, just as one simple teacher once inspired a nation of millions.
To find more tools, tricks, and tips for your classroom, please visit our Patreon. Leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to support the channel. Click the bell for notification of when our next video posts. And we hope to see you again on the next page.